This is Me Before Mom, the podcast that helps moms stay connected to themselves while doing the most important job they'll ever have. And I'm your host, Bert Anderson. Hey guys, I am pausing right now because what I feel that I need to talk about with you guys is a little more sensitive. And so it feels trivial to come on and be like, hey, it's Bert. You're listening to Me Before Mom. And you are listening to Me Before Mom. And my name is Bert Anderson. But the times that we're living right now is from the pandemic to the US kind of being woke, just to the racial injustices that have happened to the Black community for hundreds of years. It's heavy stuff, and it's hard for it to not affect your thought patterns. So I wanted to share with you guys because in season 1, I talked about racism and kind of where I am at in my journey along trying to understand it and confront it. And then living in the Twin Cities and being so close to, the place where George Floyd was murdered, and going down there, my family and I went down to Lake Street and donated things and seeing the destruction. I felt sad because it finally all made sense. We, as white people, myself included, obviously, it's this looking at systematic racism really is personal, and it feels really uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable. And nobody likes to live in, being uncomfortable. Like, I don't know anybody who's like, I'm going to think about something really awkward that I have done wrong, and I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to sit here and stew about it. I mean, nobody wants to do that. So I wanted to share with you my story, how I've gotten to this place. I mentioned that, I've been thinking about racism in America for about 2.5 years. I would say I've been thinking about it from a heart standpoint of really trying to understand it. I did not decide to do this on my own. I wasn't like, there's no credit to me thinking about this at all. So a while ago, 2.5 years ago to be specific, Disney used to send bloggers out on press trips. Whenever there was a movie, a press trip is when, the actors and the director and producers get together and they talk to the press to promote a movie. And I have gone on six. I've gone on 6. In 2018, though, A Wrinkle in Time was coming out, and that is my all-time favorite book. And I desperately wanted to go on the press trip for A Wrinkle in Time. And I was in a mastermind type group called Courage to Earn More. It is an amazing, if you're a writer, it is the whole Courage to Earn community is just a great place to be. And the woman who started it all, her name is Brandy Riley, and she created a mastermind group called Courage to Earn More. And it was a very close knit group of women, and we're all close with each other. And 2018 Black Panther came out, and suddenly all of these really talented Black bloggers were being recognized, and they were all asked to go on the Black Panther trip, which makes a lot of sense because they should. They should have been the ones who were going on it. And then A Wrinkle in Time happened, and that was the press trip that I really wanted to go. And I wasn't chosen to go at all. And there's no application process at all that you can do for this. And the majority of the press trip were comprised of a lot of the same bloggers who had gone to Black Panther. And in the group, people would announce like, oh my goodness, I got my, pixie dust email from Disney and I'm going to go, I'm going on this press trip and blah, blah, blah. And I foolishly said, congrats, but I'm so jealous, blah, 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 blah. I think at one point I had also posted in the group again saying, I'm so excited for all of you guys that are going on this trip, but I'm so sad because I really, really wanted this. And I thought everything was fine. One day, Brandy she reached out to me and she said, can I talk to you about something? And we talked on the phone, and she called me out one-on-one, which I so respect how she did this. She did it in love, and she said, Bert, when you posted these things in the group, when you commented on other people's announcements that they were going on this press trip, and then you said, oh, I'm so jealous, I wish I was going, blah, blah, blah. She's like, you took something away from the women who were going. And I know that you weren't trying to, but I need you to look at this and see how it made these Black women feel. And it like crushed me to my core. And I had to, because the first thing that I wanted to do, my first instinct was to be the sensitive white girl from, the suburbs who's like, I'm not racist. I wasn't trying to do that at all. You can't do this. You can't say this. But something in that moment and the way Brandy was able to lovingly call me out on it made me stop and think, she's not angry with me. Like, she's hurt by my actions. And that was the catalyst for what made me start thinking about, my fellow bloggers who are Black, and being aware at the inequality that they experience and they have experienced in the blogosphere. So that was the first part of all of this. So it's been 2.5 years. I've, been thinking about, off and on thinking about racism. And then in the middle of a pandemic, when we're really not doing anything but hanging out in our homes or in our yards when it's nice outside, when we, in the middle of all of this, when there's nothing really to talk about other than COVID-19, George Floyd is inhumanely murdered in front of a group of people, and it's on video. And it was so, he was not even treated like a human. And watching that, and there was something about that stirs something in me, that saw for the first time how truly oppressed the Black community has been in America forever. And I'm not going to go on like a big, long, diatribe of it was unjust, and you know it was unjust. And if this is the first time you're thinking about this, um, and you know in your heart that what happened was absolutely wrong. I don't care what anybody did in their past. Nobody, no human deserves what he endured in his last moments of life. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's wrong. And so I looked at that, and the first thing that I went through was, we have to do something. I need to do something. Like, what are we going to do? And so I contacted one of the pastors at my church who is in charge of missions. And I was like, are we going to do anything about this? How are we going to help? And so we collected donations, and then we went down or whatever. And it didn't feel like enough. And then I started hearing the term white savior, and it stung, but it was right. The people that I came in contact with, the Black leaders in the Minneapolis community that was really affected in this, what they were saying to us that they needed, they were like, we have the donation thing down. We know the physical things that our community needs. We need you to do the hard work of looking inwardly at this. Because if anything is going to change, you have to do the work. The Black community, it's not their responsibility to hold our fragile white hands and walk us through what they've experienced for the past, however many hundreds of years. It's not their responsibility at all. So no white saviors. That was a term that really stung. And I think the reason why was because this is such a heart issue, and we're all control freaks, in my opinion. We want to control something, and a way of controlling this and feeling like you're doing something is to kind of be like, we're going to swoop in and we're going to save the day. And the Black community doesn't need saving. They need us to do the work to make the actual change. And when we sit and we decide to put up a black square on our Instagram page and our Facebook, it's a great moment in solidarity, but it cannot be the only thing that we do. We can't look at things that we're doing and check off the box to be like, see, I'm not racist. I did this. That's not how it works. We took my son with us down to Minneapolis because I really wanted him to see, I wanted him to understand how real this was and what righteous anger and hurt look like. And he's 11, so he's still thinking and processing, through things. But when we were leaving, he said, he was like, it feels real now. And he was telling me a few weeks after we went down to Minneapolis, he said, Mom, I was playing with so-and-so, and they were saying all these things like, that, George Floyd was a bad man, and so that's why this happened. And he's like, and I don't think that that's right. And I don't understand why they think that way. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It's not right, because it doesn't matter what somebody has done. but the color of their skin should never be what they're judged on. And I've talked about this before too. It's not about being colorblind. That's dumb. You can't be colorblind. And I've used my sister as an example. She's a redhead. To look at my sister, see her red hair, and be like, I'm not going to notice that she has red hair. It's just don't do it, because it takes away something that's unique to her. So what really has like really connected with me, my light bulb moment, was my brother-in-law sent me a Time magazine article that was talking about racism, specifically in Minneapolis. And I'm thinking, hey, we're a northern state. We don't have racism. That's something you see in Mississippi. And this article talked about, and I'll link it, I'll have it in the show notes, but it was talking about Minneapolis's history, in particular to racial covenants. Now, there's an excellent resource out there called Mapping Prejudice. And what they do is it's this group of people, nonprofit, who look through the legal documents and the deeds, the property deeds from way back in the day. We're talking like 1910. Actually, 1910 was when the first racial covenant showed up in a deed. And looking at this back, and because you can think about it and you're like, oh, well, that, what does it really matter if you own a piece of property? Like, does that really, who cares? You don't have to own a piece of property. And how does that go into, what your family will experience for generations to come? And I think the thing that I've learned and that we forget is that in the early 1900s, property was passed down to your family. So a family, in order to succeed in America, had to, owning property was a really, really big deal. And there was, I guess, okay, so I'm going to read this to you guys. Let's see, here we go. Okay, so in Minneapolis, the first racially restrictive deed appeared in 1910, when Henry and Leonora Scott sold a property on 35th Avenue South to Nels Anderson. The deed conveyed in that transaction contained what would become a common restriction stipulating that the, and I quote, premises shall not at any time be conveyed, mortgaged, or leased to any person or persons of Chinese, Japanese, Moorish, Turkish, Negro, Mongolian, or African blood or descent. Henry Scott, who's the guy who was the first one to put that deed into practice in Minneapolis, he became the first president of a real estate development company called the Seven Oaks Corporation, and the Seven Oaks Corporation became a major player in the real estate industry in Minneapolis in the early 1900s, when property was starting to kind of take hold and everything. Another thing that I read, it said when this first racially restrictive deed was written, Minneapolis was not particularly segregated, but covenants changed the landscape of the city. As racially restrictive deeds spread, African Americans were pushed into a few small areas of the city. And even as the number of Black residents continued to climb, ever larger swaths of the city became entirely white. This laid the groundwork for our contemporary patterns of racial segregation. And again, I'll link this website, Mapping Prejudice, in the notes, but they have maps of Minneapolis, and you can see the neighborhoods where the the Black community was pushed into them. And then when you compare those maps to where George Floyd was murdered and the riots happened, it's those neighborhoods that us white people pushed the Black community into and said, you cannot own anything except for in these few neighborhoods. And that stuck with me, because reading about these racial covenants, reading about how even in America, where Black people were not enslaved, they were completely oppressed by white people who had the money and who had the power. And I look at them and I see the Black community, and I cannot help but to recognize and acknowledge that they've never had a chance. They've never had a chance. Sure, we ended slavery, and that was great. Let's pat ourselves on the back. But the oppression and the segregation, I mean, we have got to, as a white society, we have to take the time to be uncomfortable and see things as they are and understand that life has been set up so that if you are a Black person in America, it's almost like you're born into this system that wants you to fail. Your opportunities, your innocence, it's taken away from you. I don't want to be the white savior. That's not what this is about. The Black leaders in the communities of Minneapolis, they know how to help their people. They know what to do. They don't need me coming in and on my white horse saving the day. They don't. And if anything is going to change in this country, if I am going to be part of any change, I have to do the ugly, uncomfortable work of looking inwardly, looking at how I have remained silent on this issue, how I have chosen to put my head in the proverbial rainbow glitter sand that I would like to live in. That's not life. And being silent, it just continues this problem. I'm contributing to the problem. And I don't want to look at the end of my life and think to myself, because now I've seen it. I've seen how a system works against an entire group of people who are completely innocent. You know, when you think about it, like, we're born into this world, and hopefully we get a chance. But how can you be born into a system that works against you? And I don't want to look at the end of my life, I don't want to look at myself and be like, well, I never used any bad racial words. And, you know, I have like 2 or 3 Black friends, so I'm not part of the problem. That is the problem. That's the problem. So this work, what we've been asked to do as a white culture, we've been asked to look at things and see where we've gone wrong and how we've contributed to the problem. I'll list a few resources that I have used in trying to learn more about this and learn the history of it. And I have no idea why. You know, I'm 37 years old and I am just now learning about racial covenants. Why? Like, why did I not learn about this earlier? Because it's uncomfortable, that's why. It's really uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. And I think there's so much shame centered around this that we conveniently leave it out of the history books. Or if we talk about it, it might only be for, a day. I was listening to a TED Talks short that was really amazing. It was this Black professor who was talking about Rosa Parks and the real story of Rosa Parks, and how, his son came home one day from school and said, "Oh, we learned about Rosa Parks today. We learned about how she was this frail woman, and she was just so tired and old, and she just wanted to sit on a bus." And the professor said, he was like, "Son, that's not who Rosa Parks was. Here's her autobiography, read the book." And then he said that, his son got all fired up after reading about Rosa Parks, and she was not a frail Black woman who was working all day. She was 40 years old, a seamstress. It's not like she was standing, but she was tired of being treated as less than because of the color of her skin. She'd experienced it her entire life, and she was done. There's power in that. But I hadn't heard that story. I had heard the same thing. Poor, frail Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. That's not history. That's not what happened. And I don't know if you can hear in my voice how frustrating and angry this is. But I can't go back and change the things that I learned when I was a child as it pertains to Black history. I can't. What I can do now is I can look at the truth, and I can seek out resources so that I can learn what really happened. TPT, which is the Minnesota public television station here, they did an amazing documentary called Jim Crow of the North. I highly recommend it. It talks all about racial covenants, and it talks about mapping prejudice, mapping prejudice's work and what they learned. You can't argue with historical documents and legal documents from back in the day. You can't argue with that. So if you are listening to this right now and you're thinking, "Oh, I don't want to do this. Can't we just all pretend that we're happy?" We're at a point in history where we can't. We can't stick our head in the sand anymore. We can't look at ourselves and be like, "Well, I don't say bad racism words. I'm not a racist, so I'm not going to go there." Silence speaks volumes. And there's a part of me that's like, I'm excited because I feel like maybe if we can do the hard work of looking inwardly, us white people, if we can do the hard work of looking at how our silence has only perpetuated the problem and has put us in the place that we're in today, where a white police officer thinks it's okay to put his knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Our silence is the problem. I'm not saying that you need to go out and do picketing or anything like that. Peaceful protests work, and they're very effective. But I really think that as a culture, we have to do the work to look inwardly at how we have continued the problem. So I will list, and the next episode after this, I will share with you guys some resources that I have been reading, listening to, watching. But I'm telling you, it's not going to be easy. But sometimes the best things in life and those pivotal moments, you don't change unless you change. My friend Luke, who is a personal trainer, says that all the time as it refers to weight loss. If you don't change behaviors, you never change. If we continue to pretend that this isn't our fault and we haven't done anything as a society to perpetuate this, nothing changes. And I don't want my children to live in a world like this. I'm not okay with it. So that's where I'm at, guys. I am doing the hard and ugly work of looking at myself, feeling uncomfortable, feeling guilty, and just kind of hanging out here and working through those emotions. And when I say this, because I always tell you guys to be kind to yourself. What I mean in this instance about being kind to yourself is to accept your part in this dialogue. Say, I was wrong. And then do the work to change. So while you're doing the work to change, don't run from it, because it's going to be uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. But be kind to yourself when you're doing this, and understand that you are going to stumble a few times before you can actually get up and walk in truth. So above all else, be kind to yourself. Always be kind.
That's all we have. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to connect with me on bertmanderson.com, and please visit our website, matriarchdm.com, for all of the show notes and to hear other awesome podcasts.